podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Peace. I'm Justice.
Justice Rajee.
Man. So, we was going to try to jump right into it. And, I think the first thing we want to start with is I want to just speak on a little bit of this DeShawn Watson situation. And I think we may have glanced or touched on it at different points at some time in the past. But the interesting note that I'm just as monitoring since the ruling from the administrator came out, and there was the leak prior that the league, they went into whatever the arbitration conversation was about, that they wanted a year and an indefinite suspension. And it was a signaling within that they leaked that the arbitrator was likely to not rule that. And there's all this, I'm not here to legislate, what clearly looks like he's a fucking weird dude at a minimum, to someone who, if he was looking to pay for services, there's a way to make sure that everybody that wants to do that agreed to that when they showed up to the meeting. And he doesn't seem to be a person that understands that. And that can be wildly dangerous and unsafe. And he's definitely on the old school community rule, which hopefully we're getting better, where we'll be like, wait, who was they over there with? No. I'll be right back. You know what I'm saying? Because that ain't the person you supposed to let your cousin get in the car with, kind of dude, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Them type of rules. And it's so, yeah. So, his behavior itself, at least alleged, and what appears to be, happening with him. But the thing that I'm curious about, right, and processing, is you have basically a situation where we're asking your employer to almost hold you to a higher kind of public and moral, social, whatever standard than the public entity, right, is asking you to do. And I think there's a place for public facing, especially if you're in service or work, that your integrity as a person directly impacts your credibility to do your job, right? So, someone's worked in human services for most of the last 20 years. My public self does impact my credibility to be working, especially sometimes with folks in vulnerable, compromised, positions, or in need, in that I'm not someone that, has demonstrated a capacity that I can't be trusted to do the right thing. And I understand the sort of I guess we lived through the 90s and the famous Charles Barkley, like, I'm not a role model piece and all that, and the kind of breaking of that idea. But we have the American tradition of, like, sports athlete as role model to the kids, and there's something to, at least, like, if the kids ask, like, so why don't some people like, that quarterback? And then someone having to explain, well, he may or may not have done, various, nefarious, disrespectful acts, victimizing acts against women and da. Like, that would be, I can understand someone's angst. And so, anyway, let me fast forward. What I'm trying to get to is, one, this notion of, like, as a observing public, wanting, like, whatever the punishment is, feeling like the punishment's not sufficient, also not necessarily articulating what would be sufficient punishment. And I want to reference just because I think it's really important. This all goes back to um, the Ray Rice situation, in that ultimately Ray Rice never really played football again. Even though his suspension was not as long as folks wanted it to be, he never played football again. That was basically it. It was a wrap. No one would resign him. Uh, and I ain't saying that they should have. I'm just saying if that's our of obviously a much more a different circumstance. But as a to understand, like, and also that in a weird way, they like the man didn't play football last year, and they didn't officially say it was because of this, but like we all know it was because of this. So you put all that together, and it gets into this weird thing of like, how do we stay within our values as a public around holding people accountable for their actions, right? And the number of other worlds where professionally there's more than likely someone who has done something that we'd be like, oh, that's what you did off the clock, you know, that maybe would require us to reconsider like their role in the public sphere. But I just think it's a strange bag. So that was my opening thought on the DeShawn Watson thing.
So, as always, just your verbal wizardry and communication is unparalleled. So start there. Yeah, Um, so a couple things, like 3 points, I think, to build off of what you're saying. Number one, and I guess this is a tough point, and I know that there in the new spaces, there are places that folks are talking about pro sex worker and all those things. And I think everyone should be safe and healthy, and nobody should be put in positions where they're compromised. And I think it's this weird idea where people go for something that is not clear sex work, but then expect sex work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost something that not everyone, I'll be clear now, everyone's got comfortable with, but this idea, like, I'm going to say this, but it's going to end up over here. So I'm going to start with this, but it's going to end up with a quote unquote happy ending, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there are some situations where that is totally kind of like an unspoken agreement. And then there's situations where someone is like, that's not the agreement. And
Right.
clearly he was a person that went looking for those agreements where they were not continuously,
Right.
which I think is the challenge and the kind of pathology, frankly, right? Like, there's something to be said, like, okay, there's a set of people that you connect with, acknowledging that there's an unspoken conversation, right? But when you go to 30 and 40 people and keep finding situations where it went overboard, then that's a challenge, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I kind of want to just speak to the fact that, like, yeah, it might be somewhere, some places be unspoken, but like you should continue to go to those places where it's unspoken, not places where we're not places where you're trying to test the waters and compromising people because they provide a service.
Right.
And to your point, like, yeah, you gotta, how black folks say, watch them over there, watch them expletive over there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, because you know you just got to respect the rules of what you're engaging in. So that's number one. Number two, you made a very interesting point about people who work in human services and being expected to live and abide by a higher form of character. I think it's a really unique idea where we pay people so little to not only do work with the most vulnerable members of our society, we then expect them to have immaculate character
Mm.
while they do so.
Yeah.
And that implicit agreement, which is a challenge of the nonprofit industrial complex, right? Like, that is a really huge challenge when we juxtapose the personal conduct of a person who throws around a football and tries to get it into a place where everyone can jump on each other and cheer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we acknowledge that that person does that, and they do it at a high level so people make themselves rich off of this person, and they have become rich and they make themselves rich. So therefore, the NFL, to your point, has said, hey, we expect something higher, right? But it's hypocritical. it's hypocritical on a number of levels. We know, for example, we just saw what happened with the Dolphins. We know that the organization tampered and broke the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Like Stephen Ross broke the rules, not only with Tom Brady, but with Sean Payton.
Yeah.
And you took draft picks and said he couldn't be around for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
You know he did it. Not he was found guilty. Like he was guilty.
I just add to that, and they didn't. I mean, they just kind of said the reason that the tanking wasn't tanking is because the coach ended up not losing a lot, basically. Like not because they actually didn't. Well, like no, like so you mean like they were totally cool with tanking, like you know what I'm saying? But like it was a very circular logic as to why the tanking wasn't tanking because it was like, well, you know, like kind of because they ended up winning more than they
because they ended up
expected. So.
winning, then he didn't tank. Versus, did you ask him to tank? Versus, did they end up tanking? Like, hold on, like so you juxtapose a person who obviously we started with our perspective on you know,
yeah,
but settled claims and was found not guilty, right? Yep. Again, not the pinnacle of human behavior, not the paragon of human behavior
at all.
You know, but then you want to get him out for at least a year and fine him $8 million? Where someone that cheated in your sport leaves for 6 weeks and you find him $1 million, and this guy is the head of related company, Stephen Ross? What, like, now I do understand. I think this is a reality of our society. There's a perspective of what people think he should be accountable for, right? Like you said, the challenge is that it's not clear, right? Mm-hmm. It's in no way clear what should happen to him. But the NFL is trying to legislate that. And then, the last thing, you create a collective bargaining agreement between you and the union. You say, if it's a problem that y'all can't resolve, you go to a third person. Cool. The third person comes back with an answer. You don't like the answer, so now you take it to another court. What does that tell from a worker perspective?
Yeah. And even there's the added the way that I think there was, some of the reading around this, and the thing that was significant was that basically, like I said, the Goodell rode in his administration of the NFL kind of on this like cleaning up the madness of, which really was never as whatever people thought it was around. I mean, there were definitely issues. There's always, I mean, in America, put it like this: if the NFL has issues sometimes with folks off the field behavior, I guarantee you, all of your much larger employers in our society have problems too, right? But we don't think, we don't make that connection, right? And even I would just say for all of us, that we've experienced the phenomenon of over the last 2 years of predominantly white folks wilding out in public and, putting a black person off, and then sometimes other people of color. But a lot of the videos that are most prominent are the ones involving black folks' life in jeopardy via false claims or just, verbally assaulting them and, various things. And then their employers deciding that they're not really fit to be work for them anymore. Like those phenomena, we had these two phenomena happening. It's if you have the problem that they've had with the league is this sort of, and the Players Association agreed to some things where they would, let Goodell have this large sway, but it ends up with you have wildly inconsistent rulings. So you got on this we did that, and on that we did this, and well maybe we should do 4 games, and then, yeah, let's do 8. Let's And the problem I see in it is, and it's important that when we think about processes, is like trying to use imperfect, not just imperfect, but imperfect information, unclear expectations, and even ultimately, like, what are we actually trying to achieve right now? If you're trying to get a certain reaction out of making these decisions and these rulings, and I want to say this to make sure it's clear. None of this means I'm not a part of team. Well, like he ain't getting convicted or nothing, so nothing bad happened. Like just if any of y'all are that person that's listening, it's like, yeah, he ain't do nothing wrong. since he didn't go to get arrested or they couldn't file charges, he didn't do nothing wrong. Come on now, right? Like, there's sufficient evidence that if I was just put it like this, he wouldn't be able to work at our program. If I was working in the programming world, he wouldn't be able to work in no programs no more. He'd be out. He'd be like, nah, dog. Like, you sure as hell can't work here. Like, your coworkers don't trust you. Families is coming up to us like, wait, he's still gonna be coming back here with the kids? Word? You know what I'm saying? Like
which
that
is
that
which is which is my point about the irony of us having jobs that work directly with people who aren't paid well, to have this such a high form of like character.
yeah,
And everyone should have character. That's not my point. My
yeah,
point is like that would be the biggest thing there. But is it the thing at Goldman Sachs? Is it the thing at Target? Like you know what I mean? And would it be the thing at NFL if we weren't in the times we were in? And that's not a support for it, but it is to say it is wildly inconsistent. And I wouldn't want to work nowhere where my union negotiated that we're going to abide by going to a third party. The third party essentially says, you know what? I kind of think the person did what they said they did. I kind of think they did what they did, but
right,
you messed up as far as how you frame it. So I cannot give you what you want,
right.
right? And then you still go to get it. So it's just a messaging that you send that it doesn't absolve him of being a slime ball, but it does speak to this idea of quote unquote judge, jury, and executioner.
Yeah. Well, and it gets to the thing that I mean, and this happens, and just as I've been involved, in all in the world of because what we're like quasi having this kind of conversation about law, right? And like, I'm saving some thoughts for this one day. I'm gonna do a long rant on the foolishness of the idea of someone being soft on crime and anyone allowing someone else to accuse you of being soft on crime without, kicking them hard in the chest, verbally. You know what I mean? Uh, Within the construct of peaceful dialogue. You know what I'm saying? Not like, I ain't advocating necessarily that anybody need to get kicked in the chest. I'm just saying if someone accused me of, what's insinuated in that phrase. But the idea that we have here is like we if you haven't sat and thought about what is the actual toll of not just of accountability, right, and of punishment, right? Because we sometimes think of punishment as accountability, and accountability then could be manifest as punishment or a punitive outcome for a person for something that they did, right? And that doesn't always make whatever they did go away. It does, there is a value to the persons that are harmed getting acknowledgement from the community that the community cares that something happened to the person that harmed them, right? So we got all these different perspectives and points, and the place where we land in the kind of the middle, even though the middle isn't the best way to say it, as a larger society, is like if the dude never played football again, I mean, ultimately, it wouldn't be the end of the world for me. It'd be fine. The but when you get to the question of these concepts of like due process, and that if we made rules about something, and then when we don't like the rules, we want to throw the rules out and get new rules, right? Then why do we even have rules to begin with? Like there got to be some sort of way we try to figure this out that you can get a sufficient proper outcome, and then the bigger question of us as a larger society not figuring out a way that doesn't require, again, placing sort of the authority to make this decision in his employer, right? When we have a government, we have a government of the people, by the people, for the people, right? That we should be able, and then we have the other ways as a community we can engage and talk about, like, all right, hold up, man. Like, as we referenced when we was talking about I don't remember which thing it was, but basically the idea that because we don't operate with any, restorative collective concepts in our broader public conversation, we can't do something where we be like, nah, man, we're gonna get DeShawn, we're gonna get everybody DeShawn harmed. We're gonna we all gonna work this shit out. right? And if it means he gotta go kick rocks he gotta do something else besides football for a living, cool. If it means, I mean, I think even just as a additional ringer for the people that I believe in his contract too, like he's not allowed to go to no massage that ain't from the team. Like
You
it,
damn right you can't go to no massage ballers. You damn right. Listen, listen, man. He don't need to go nowhere with no ideas, feelings, perspectives of none of the above, man. And he need to go talk to somebody, man. Because
absolutely,
regardless of if you were found guilty, something's going on.
yeah.
Now, also, and here's a challenge that we have. I'm not positioning that where I'm at with it. But if he comes to terms and agreements with the people that it is identified that he harmed, then what is the society's responsibility beyond that?
Right.
Right? Like, whether you call it a paying them off, hushing them, whatever. Because we got this interesting thing in our society where, like, someone said you did something. We don't know if you did it or you're not, but you come to terms with them,
Mm-hmm.
and then no one can talk about it anymore,
Yeah.
regardless if it happened or it didn't happen. And then
That's
we don't know how much you gave them. I'm not saying that's worth whatever happened, but maybe at some point, legally, you determine that maybe it was worth it. Because at some point, you say, "Hey, you did something to me," and regardless if we call it illegal, it was egregious, right? Let's just assume that. And then that person says, "You know what? Might have been a misunderstanding, or I might have did it, but I don't want to talk about it no more. And here's the number today," right? Then there's a question of, as a society, what do we owe if that person has agreed to move on?
yeah.
You know, and again, not that it means that we shouldn't care, but it means that that person decided that this issue is going to be at least legally resolved by this, if not culturally, right? So I think it's a lot of the stuff in our society that frankly doesn't make sense wrapped up in one case. And it's like, okay, NFL, you know, Stephen, people who are already super wealthy get 6 months, weeks
Yeah.
off for doing something they did.
Right.
Like, absolutely, it, trying to get a person, not just from one team, from two teams, right? The
Yeah.
Dolphins were found tampering not only when he was with New England, but when he was with Tampa Bay.
And all the way back to 2019, like before
Exactly.
2019. So it's several. This ain't no like we just started. Like we just got into the tampering game. Like so, I don't know if we got to a clear resolution. I just wanted to say for the record, it's a whole mess. And as long as we continue to use sort of inadequate systems to try to resolve these complicated questions, we're going to get less than adequate outcomes. And, I ain't saying we got to accept less than adequate outcomes, but I think if we can start to have an open conversation, like, yeah, that's a terrible that's not a really fully sufficient outcome, right? In many different spheres, we can start to get to like, well, how do we get to some better outcomes? And then, also start maybe adjusting our expectations. Now, I'm not saying that I don't think in any of our spheres of influence. I was just reading something which I'll save for a later conversation. Kind of it was a Newsweek article about like kind of the conservative business backlash against wokeism, which had all kinds of issues with just the idea that there's just a way that they frame some things. I'm like, man, you're really making it seem like that's a reasonable way to think about the world. But anyway, the larger point is that we one of the worst things anyone can have is get good outcomes from bad process. And we have a whole society that has, got lots of great things out of like, making people toil in pain and misery. And it's like, but look at the size of this plantation house. It's beautiful. Look at the pillars. And the white on that paint. It's great. Yeah, but look at these people over there, humans being degraded and commodified in order to make that. maybe this isn't a good process. Maybe this is a terrible process, and we should just acknowledge it was a bad process. But not to be Rajee the downer. I'm just saying. So there's that.
And there it is.
So the other thing I wanted to touch on with you quickly was your man's West Virginia's own, you know what I'm saying? Joe Manchin. In a turn of events, after initially saying, yeah, and there ain't gonna be no climate deal to the inflation and the blah 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 blah. I was like, actually, I got a climate deal. I hear the climate deal, I'm cool. You know what I'm saying? And they, I'm more comfortable that the inflation will not be impacted, whatever, stuff he said that, I ain't gonna say the man lying. I'ma just say, I ain't gonna say the man lying. You know what I mean? But the interesting piece of it is like, politics and the way politics and public policy and decisions are made in our society. I just feel like old Joe, has enjoyed being the center of attention for the last year.
Absolutely.
And I think we can never overestimate in society the way someone's behavior, whatever you may think of it, not that he was some super duper extra progressive, Democrat to begin with, so to speak.
Quite the contrary.
Right. But just the way someone position and situation changes when they have more power and leverage. And so whatever you thought about them, people say, well, I guess the easiest proxy would be in our society, or most people would experience, is someone comes into more, financial, prosperity, and supposedly, you got changed since you got that money. You know what I'm saying? Especially if it's fast and sudden money change, but whatever the case may be, sort of like, old Joe's over there being Joe Manchin for the last however many years he been Joe Manchin. But now Joe Manchin is the dude who sits in this place. Oh, everybody got to listen to me. Everybody got to take my meetings. Everybody got to respond to my invites. Everybody got to come to my hearings that I call because they want something from me. Word up. Let's do it. You know what I'm saying? And the that then produces whatever it produces. Like, I ain't saying that he's right. I'm saying some of y'all should have seen it coming. I mean, I think some people did. That's obviously why he quickly became the, like, let's talk about, Joe, what's Joe Manchin going to do, right? But then I think, I don't know. I have no inside information. Justice is not a political insider of the DC Beltway, but my external assessment would be, last summer I got to be the star. I don't want to let go just yet. Also, though, I really, I am, I'm more with these dudes than those dudes, and I can't like totally, let this climate stuff. I can't let this fall apart all the way because, I am kind of more down with these guys than those guys. And if I do that, then these guys pretty much look totally inept. So therefore, I'm gonna make them sweat for a couple weeks. Then I'll be like, yeah, I got a deal. Here's the deal I like. Let's do this. And there we are. You know what I mean? So that's my thought.
So I got a lot of thoughts about this. Almost as many thoughts as I had about when Jadakiss and them destroyed the Locks last year on Versus. But I got a lot of thoughts about this too. So number one, I want to say that I think, and this is to folks who consider themselves progressives, you have to, it's one thing to study what you want, but it's also good to study how things come to be. Change in our society is as much about the ideas as it is about the timing of when the ideas come to pass. So when you look at what Joe Manchin supports or what he would go for, what he has gone for is frankly nothing that he never told people he wouldn't go for. Joe Manchin never wanted widespread families to get tax rebates from like taking care of their kids. That just is never what he's thought. And so if you thought he was going to do that because Joe Biden is president, you're wrong. He wasn't going to go for what he wasn't going to go for. You don't have to like it, but you should know what you're dealing with before you deal with it. And very similar, we should be really clear about our expectations of what we're going to get. Even if someone campaigns and tells you that they're going to do something, you should still have your own idea of what you reasonably expect. You can have what you want to see, but then you should have what you could reasonably expect. If I ask Messiah to clean his room, I know what I might want to see, but I also know, frankly, what is more likely he's going to produce. Mm-hmm. So if he does not produce what I want to see all the time, I cannot be chastise him or punish him, knowing realistically that's not what I'm going to see, right? So in the same way, I mean, let's be clear. We got much more of a climate policy than we have in generations.
Yeah.
Like generation, this is a generational deal. This is not an okay deal. This is a huge deal. Right? And we should respect it as that. And that doesn't mean it'll be okay, but it reflects the fact that the window of society has moved even to the point where someone like Joe Manchin is willing to vote for a climate deal. Mm-hmm. It is not without its warts because, frankly, he still represents a state that is making an energy transition. And that's really important for people to think about. Because if you live in a space that you don't acknowledge that people's jobs have still been lost, that there are places still using coal and natural gas so that you can electrify your car, right? Like, if people should acknowledge that where you get your electric from, when you get an electric car, it ain't solar power.
Yeah.
Right? They're not using the wind turbines in Holland or the wind turbines outside of Maryland. They're not producing enough energy for you to do that yet. Mm-hmm. Right? And so we still have in America, we still have an energy transition. And it doesn't mean that you're not progressive to recognize we have an energy transition. Yeah. And I think most rational people, Joe Manchin included, knows that the future of American energy cannot be in the destructive methodologies that we have used up until now. Yeah. Now, if you disagree that he doesn't want to move as fast as you, then you have a broader disagreement with wide swaths of the segment of America. Because there are wide swaths of the segments of America who are not sold on solar energy, or not sold on hydro, and are not sold on wind. And as another thing I think we have to think about, we have to write in the costs of what those things will mean to people who are currently receiving energy that is not the cleanest. Mm-hmm. Right? Because there is a cost to that. America has benefited from cheap energy, which is why you leave your air conditioning on all the time. Again, you're not leaving your air conditioning all the time because of them solar panels. You're leaving energy all the time because of some pretty destructive ways that we mine energy, right? And that's just real. So I think it's an example of the way politics is done, and it's not pretty. And that's why you send people to do it who know the arts of it, not people to, like, you put the ideas in the public sphere, in the public square, to move things, but you send people to facilitate it. As much as people laugh at Chuck Schumer, you know that Chuck Schumer never said a negative thing about Joe Manchin.
Nah.
Right? He didn't get mad, even when the White House, which it show you, and as good as Biden is, and I'm going to name the person, Ron Klain, made a really bad judgment on the things that the White House was sending out, to the point where the White House had no role in this actual deal. Mm-hmm. Because the White House made it personal. Yeah. Because they were pushed by parties in the Democratic Party who were like, make it personal, when it wasn't, and he was going to cut a deal. And also the reality of it is, for whoever wanted the semiconductor deal, right? And different people have on different places had different perspectives of the semiconductor bill, but it was no way that he could have supported a climate deal before the semiconductor deal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The semiconductor deal would have been dead on arrival. So Schumer has been there long enough and understands the personalities of people, because politics, like anything else in the world, is about personality.
Yeah.
And if you think politics just about ideas, think about your family.
Right.
Right? There's some people in your family who you gotta get them to a place to accept the thing happening.
Right. Right.
It ain't about the righteousness of the idea. It's about that person being okay with how they feel about the thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just, it's a it's a it's a lesson in there to be had about, ultimately our outcomes of our society are going to be made on human decisions. And I think all of us falter when we lose sight of the idea, or maybe we don't understand that we actually have to get people to do stuff. Not like units or voters, or entities or whatever, or parties, like these kind of theoretical proxies for, like, we're talking about people, and you got to get the people to be on board with something if are trying to change the society or redirect it, or if you're trying to make things better, or whatever you're trying to do. And not to say that everyone always does it well, but the places sometimes, that become the, like, compelling story on your late night news, they always personalize it with a person, so that you identify with the person, and then you might then feel some sort of way based on what you feel about or presume about the person, right? Because when you talk about it in a larger way, it's kind of like it doesn't seem real, but when you think it's a person, you're like, oh yeah, yeah, should watch out for those toads, man. Give you a weird bad rash. Touch one of them toads, right? Like the um, but like we externally, there's a and I'm trying to do better, right? That sometimes when people are just saying stuff like on social media or public other streams, that they're maybe just venting, sort of their frustration about something, and I shouldn't take it that seriously. But I am always concerned that, like, even I'm very measured for the most part, so usually stuff I say, I felt comfortable saying it. Not to say that I'm not accountable if I said something that was offensive or inappropriate or hurtful. But largely, I try to be pretty accurate, pretty clear what I'm, even if I'm clearly saying I don't really know what I'm saying. Like, I try to say I don't totally know what I'm saying, so I'm saying this because I want to say it, but I don't totally know what I'm
That was a
saying.
good one.
So I'm open, for correction and modification of this position, right?
That's right. That's right.
um,
We have to be
um,
open. We have to be open. We get to the known through dealing with the unknown,
mhm.
right? And even according to mathematics, we draw things up. We take our knowledge and wisdom and draw them up to understanding. That process is there's fusion there, right?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
there,
Stuff starts
there's some
happening.
energy created.
It's gonna be some heat,
It's gonna be
heat,
some heat coming
heat,
off that
pressure.
couch, like my man from Belly. It's gonna be some heat coming off that couch, man. But we have to be open to that process. But I do, just to add on quickly, I think that the difference between and this is social media, and I think it's very interesting that those who are controlling social media understand that when we read something, we take it as truth.
Hmm.
The brain takes it one way until you actually deal with it differently, right? Like someone says something, you like, man, what? Or you be like, I agree,
Hmm.
and that itself, it actually draws you in
Yeah,
because you either like, man, what the fuck, or you like, I agree. Tell them,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. You're like,
You see what
wait.
I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, and it creates a thing, right? But to your point, it's like the challenge is that through forms of social media, through forms of what I call the original social media, aka the barbershop and the beauty salon, because the barbershop is the original place people say crazy shit, and then everybody, like, some people agree or some people just get silent,
Right.
right? Like when people start talking about COVID came from the 5G towers. Something that a lot of us have forgotten and won't get back to. The people who we generally thought were reasonable people said crazy shit like COVID came from the towers. you know,
I
and there
see.
will be some people who will make equally incredulous statements about monkeypox,
Mm,
um, which will be proven to be untrue. Um, whether it's in the barbershop, or, you and I both know sometimes somebody says something in the barbershop, and they say one thing that feels a little interesting, but people be like, oh, okay, you think about that. Then they make another statement. People like, oh man, you on a roll. And then they make one statement that's totally out of control, and everyone just goes silent.
Mhm.
Or they go, I don't know, man. You had a good point with the other shit, but I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, whether in the original social media, the barbershop and the hair salon, or in the new social media, it's about statements are put out there. And it's just about really people being able to reserve judgment on statements that they can't qualify, and think through statements that, while they may be good to like attract people to a dialogue, should not be taken as like rational political theory.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, like I said, Joe like to be the hero and the villain and the hero. Good job, way to go for him. You know what I'm saying? But I think it's also ultimately, if we're able to, get some of this stuff moving, and the chip deal, there's definitely folks that I know I read some conservatives, I guess, felt that folks signing up for that was like, oh man, we let them get basically let them get a win. And we said, which is like, yo man, I thought y'all loved this country. What happened to that?
Right.
Right. Oh,
I,
love this
I
country
thought
goes
you
out the
love
window
you
when
love to preserve national security unless the other person came up with it first.
right. Like, oh, so you mean, we should feed the children unless, you not the one feeding the children, then we don't feed it. Like, yeah, I mean, this is not good thinking. It's bad process. Like we should be working on deliberative, using our intelligence and our capacity to solve problems to come up with good answers, regardless of, even if the people who you don't always like, if the guy I don't always like says something good over there, I'm like, wait a minute. I don't always like what you say, dog. But that right there, that's a good point.
That
We
was
should
a good
work on
point.
that.
That's right.
We should work on that. So, um, real quick, because I got to wrap a little early for this one. I just wanted to. I don't have to say no superfluous language around, great Bill Russell. Returned a week in the midst of this, between the last time we talked, and also Michelle Nichols. Um, just two fantastic and impactful, black folks in different ways, and obviously in different spheres. But in terms of public figures, that you know, one, I've been telling people for the last couple of years, we're gonna lose a lot of people from our childhoods because a lot of them folks is gonna be, they up there in them ages where it can happen, and so not unexpected, at least for me. I'll speak for myself. But respects to them, and I just think the only thing I'll say one beat about Bill Russell is I really would appreciate if folks it kind of acknowledge a little bit more of his overall, not just like where he fits in the mix of this thing in terms of like the nexus between sports, entertainment, civil rights, social activism, being publicly present. But also though, man, like Son was nice at that sport. And sometimes here, our generation, we get a little we get a little bit disrespectful. Not in our generation, a little bit younger than us.
We get beside ourselves because we deal with Michael Jordan worship.
Yeah. And we need to
It's
cut
either
that out.
Michael Jordan worship, or LeBron James worship, or Kobe Bryant worship. And we think that no one played basketball well before 1985.
He
And
was just out there.
it's just crazy that we think that everybody that came before the time the basketball was on television every damn night
Mm-hmm.
couldn't stand up and couldn't play. I'm gonna say it differently than you would,
That's me.
because you are very thoughtful and measured in your statements.
Quite measured.
He won 11 championships, dog. He was the first black coach.
And played.
He was a player coach. First of all, that itself qualifies that there's no one in his league. There's no one in the league of a man who was a player and a coach. In the most racist, outwardly at least, town in America. That the police were breaking in his house, defecating in his bed, telling him people outside were doing it. And it didn't come out until the 1990s. and
Yep.
you still won 11 chips and went up against arguably the one of the other greatest players, a player that scored 100 points in a game,
Yep. And
and
your
you were still
team
in the league when one of
consistently
the
beat
other
his
players,
team.
right, and one of the other players y'all act like it wasn't good, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So to everybody, and I know this for some people who are listening, some of our people who are listening, they are really supportive of Jordan and Kobe, or you know, we got to stop this 1985 and on idea of basketball. Not to say nothing about his actual humanity, right? And him as a humanitarian, and
Right.
him, I'm not even talking about that, right? How we would want that, and only one of the three people who we all get infatuated with in any way has tried to deal with any engagement around being anything in society, frankly, and that's LeBron James.
Mhm.
Now, don't get me wrong, I don't expect people who shoot balls into hoops to be humanitarians. And I don't want my children to look up to people who put balls in hoops,
Mhm.
right? That's a thing that we've abdicated, frankly, way too much. But anyway, everybody take a look at Bill Russell's life, not just the man that he ended up being, but also actually his basketball talent, to how much that basketball and black folks have lost.
Absolutely. And and just the only I'll add on Michelle Nichols is just, you know, it's hard to be the one that's out there, especially in that day and age in a sci-fi show. You know what I mean? And whatever the weight, and then there's a whole other stream of stuff from her role in helping to get black women into being hired by NASA to get black women and other people into science and recruiting and other layers, and then just um, it just it's a different sphere, but it's definitely also appreciation and just to give them a shout out, peace to both of them. May their families, what I mean, be able to take something positive that the world loved the person that loved them. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So that you know, we can call it a wrap.
All is good with the order, sir.
Indeed. So I would say peace.
Peace.